Hi friends, welcome back to Codelligent. In continuation of our Python series, in this video we'll start looking at functions. In the next 2-3 videos, we'll be looking at the various aspects of functions in detail. So let's get started. So first let's try to understand what exactly is a function. A function is a block of reusable code that is used to perform a single related action. So till now we would have seen in the videos we were writing code one after the other and it executes in that particular order. But if there is a requirement for reuse a block of code at multiple places, we don't have to repeat it. We can create a function, put the code inside that function and call that function as many number of times as we want. But one thing which you need to be aware that whenever we create a function, the code inside that will be executed only once it is called. By default, it will be just defined and kept it. It will not be executed. So how we define functions in Python is by using the keyword def and then any name which you want for the function and empty brackets and then a colon. After that, with the given indentation, you can write as many number of lines of code as you want. And once this is defined, this function just stays there. The code inside that will never be executed unless you call it. So how you call the function is just giving the name of that function and giving the brackets. So by giving this, it will call this particular function and all the lines inside that will get executed. So let's jump into the code and let's see this in action. Now we are in our IDE, Visual Studio Code, and let's see how to create a simple function. So first we'll have to write def, then a function name, maybe greetings, and empty brackets, and then a colon. Now when you press enter, by default the IDE takes an indentation. If it doesn't, if you're writing in a notepad or something, then make sure you give a space or a tab or multiple spaces so that you maintain an indentation. Now inside this, I will use a simple statement for printing. So I'll just say hello. That's it. So now you can see a function has been created. But if we execute this, so let me execute py functions1.py. You see, nothing happens. It never prints. Because with this, you just created a function and the code will never be executed unless you call the function. So first you have to call the function by giving the function name and the brackets. Now when you execute, you can see hello. So this is how you create a simple function and call that function. And since Python is an interpreted language and it's not a compiled language, unless the execution reaches the definition of the function, interpreter will not know such a function exists. So what I mean by that, in case you call this function on the top, maybe first you are calling the function and then you are defining the function. So now in this case, since you are in IDE, it already starts showing a line on that call. Otherwise, when you execute, you can see here name error, name greetings is not defined, because for interpreter till now there is no function greetings which exists. So this is one very big difference when it comes to interpreted language from a compiled language, because in a compiled language this will be compiled first and by that time the compiler will know, okay, there is a greetings function which is already defined somewhere and I can always call that. But in an interpreted language, since it executes line by line, by the time it reaches here, till now interpreter doesn't know that there is a method called greetings which exists. So this makes sure that before calling the function, you always define the function. Okay, so there might be requirements like you want to send some information to this particular line of codes. So it can never happen in real time that you want to execute some set of code and from the context from where you're calling that, you don't have to pass anything. So it might be that you have to pass some information which you can process inside. So that can be done with the help of parameters or arguments. So when you have the same method, what you can do is inside this brackets, you can give some variable name, so which will act as a parameter. and that you can use inside this particular code. So the scope of this parameter is only in this method. So what I'll do is I'll do a formatted printing and I'll say hello name. So I'm just using this name and saying hello. But now if you call this method, let's try that. You can see there is an error which says type error, greetings, missing one required positional argument name. Because now this method takes one argument, takes one parameter, and so you have to call this method with some value. So now if I pass here Codelligent, then it will accept it. So and it will say hello Codelligent. So make sure whenever you define some parameter, you have to pass that parameter, otherwise it will give an error. So I'm using a term parameter and arguments interchangeably. So let's try to understand what exactly is the difference. So whenever you are passing information to a function, you use a variable name and you call with some value. And usually these terms, parameters and arguments, are used interchangeably by people. But from a function's perspective, a parameter is a variable listed in parentheses in the function definition, whereas an argument is the value which you send to the function while calling it. So what I mean, this particular variable which you have declared during the definition of the function is usually referred as parameter. Whereas when you are calling the function, whatever value you pass, that we call it as argument. So that's the main difference when we talk about the terms parameters and arguments. But it is fine, like people use it interchangeably. Like whenever we call a function, we say okay, pass the parameter. Whenever we define a function, we say okay, this is a parameterized function. So usually the parameter term is used very frequently than argument. So it's fine if you use them interchangeably, it is fine. So now you might have a requirement that you want to pass multiple data. That also is possible. So to see that, let's change this function. I'll create a new function called add and I'll say 2 parameters. Now inside this I'll say c is equal to a plus b, and then I will print with a formatted printing sum is c. So now this function is an add function which takes 2 parameters a and b, and inside that it does a add for these 2 values, puts into c, and the c is printed. Now when we are calling this function, I can call it as add 3, 4, and let's see what happens. It prints sum is 7. So the 3 is assigned to a, 4 is assigned to b, and inside a plus b, that means 3 plus 4, that is 7, which the value is assigned to c, and now we are printing c. So the reusability of function happens like this. You can call this add multiple times with different values. So this is the way where you are reusing this code multiple times. So otherwise, if you wanted to do this addition 3 times, you would have to use this addition line and the printing line 3 times. Instead, now we are defining that only once and just calling that with multiple different values. Now when I execute this, you can see sum is 7, sum is 11, and sum is 133. Now what if I sent a string instead of the integer? So what I mean, instead of saying add 3, 4, I'll say add abc, xyz. Yep. So what do you think will happen? Let's see. You can see ABC XYZ has been concatenated. So when we were learning the operators in our starting videos, we have seen that addition is allowed on strings as well. Instead of doing an add like integers, it just concatenates them. And since this a and b parameter in Python, it is not defined with a data type, it will accept whatever values you send. So if you send 3, 4, the a and b will take the form of integer variables, whereas if you send abc and xyz, that a and b will get the data type of string. And when you are adding two strings, it becomes a concatenation. And the same method I can use for integer as well. And this time you can see for string it gets concatenated, for integers it gets added. So you have to be very sure when you are defining a function and you are calling them, that what type of data type you want to send it, because by mistake if you send some other data type, it might create some problems. Now it might happen that you want to create a function and you want to process something inside that, and then you just don't want to print something there, but you want that value back from where you called, and you want to do something with that value. So let's see how we can do that. Imagine your requirement is you want to add two numbers and the output should be doubled. So now what you can do is you can create two functions. So for example, one is def add, one is def double, and it takes one argument or one parameter. Inside that you want maybe c is equal to a into 2. This is getting doubled, but the output of this should be passed as an input to this method. So for doing that, instead of printing this here, what I can do is I can use a return keyword and say c, and the same thing here also I'll say return c. So now I'm not processing them inside, I'm not printing them inside, I'm just processing and sending the processed value outside. Now what I can do here is I can create a variable called sum, and I can call add 3, 4, and whatever value I get, I'll recall the other method, that is double, and pass the sum. So now finally I can say print output is result. So now you can see I call add with two numbers, it goes into add, it adds them and returns the value c. And since there is a variable defined here with an assignment operator, the output which comes from this method will get assigned into this. Now I call another method double, which takes only one argument. So I pass this sum here. So it goes inside into a value, the value will be assigned into a, and a is multiplied by 2, that is it is doubled, and then that value is returned. And since there is already a variable here with an assignment operator, that value will get assigned into this, and finally that will be printed. So when you execute this, you can see the output is 14. So 3 plus 4, 7, and that 7 is multiplied by 2 and it is resulting into 14. Now when you are dealing with variables, you need to be careful about the scope. What I mean by that, I'll show you with an example. Imagine there is a variable called my location, and I'll assign a value, for example India. Then I'll define a function, maybe show location, and now inside this I create one more variable with the same name. So let's assign a new value inside the method or inside the function, and let's print maybe inside and my location. Outside the method, again first we have to call the method, so let me call show location, and after this I do a print saying outside, and it's the same variable my location. Now if you see this particular code wherein I define a my location variable with some value, and I am creating a function inside which I am using the same variable name and assigning a new value, and I'm trying to print that inside the method and outside the method. So what do you think will happen? Let's execute. Now you can see inside it's Germany, outside India. Even though the method call happened here, it went inside the method or inside the function, and there we have assigned a new value to the variable and we have printed it and we came out, and after that again we try to print the same variable but the value is different. Why this has happened? Because whatever you do like this here, it is not actually affecting the outside variable. It is creating a new variable within these methods or this function's scope. So the by location variable defined here has a scope only limited to this function. The moment you are outside this function, the scope will take from the global variable. So this variable is global variable and this variable is a local variable. So you have to be very careful in your code. If you are using the same name which is there outside the function, any global variable, then this will behave differently, because this name, even if you use the same name, it behaves as a different local variable. What if you want to use the same global variable? Inside the method, you want to allocate some new value to the same existing global variable. Then you have to explicitly tell the Python interpreter that I want to use that particular global variable only. How you do that? Inside the method, before using the variable, you have to use a keyword called global and you have to say the name of the variable. So when I say global my location, now the Python interpreter understands that inside this method, after this statement, wherever I am going to use my location, instead of creating a new variable, it should use the already existing global variable. So now in this case, when you execute the same method, now you see inside also it's Germany and outside also it is Germany. So the variable value got modified globally everywhere. So this is how you deal with the local variable and the global variable. So you have to be very careful when you are using the same name. Now going back to our previous code, so let me define a greetings function which takes a name. This is the same code which we had before. So I'll say formatted one, hello name, and when we call this greetings, okay, there is a spelling mistake. I should have two e's, okay, and I'll pass Codelligent. Now everything works fine. If I execute this code, it says hello Codelligent. But there might be a situation when in some scenario you don't want to pass anything and you want to have some other functionality, like you want to assign some default value to it when I or some other user use this function and calls without any parameters. Because as of now, if you pass greetings without any parameter, it will throw an error. So to do that, where you are defining the function and defining the parameters, there you can put an equal to and assign some default value. So for example, I am using name equal to world. Now when you are calling greetings with some value, it will use that value, and if I am calling greetings without any value, then default value will be taken over. So now if you execute this, you can see first time we pass some value, so it gives preference to that, it assigns in the name and it prints hello Codelligent. And when we are calling without any parameter or without any arguments, at that time it will take the default value as world and it will print hello world. So this scenario can be used for any type of variables. So you can have it for int, you can have for decimal, you can have it for string. You can always assign default value. But when you are assigning default value, you should make sure that you don't have any non-default variable after this. What I mean by that, let's see with a different example. I'll create an add method and I'll say a comma b, and inside this I'll say print and sum is a plus b. Yeah, so this will be my method, and when I call add with 3 comma 4, it works all fine. So let me execute this. You can see sum is 7, and I want to assign some default values. So for example, a equal to 0 and b equal to 0. That means when someone calls this method without any arguments, in that case, instead of throwing an error, just use my default value and say sum is 0. Now, what I mean by having default value towards the left hand side is like you cannot have a default for A and then you cannot have like this for B. It will give an error. So it says non-default argument follows default argument. And what's the logic behind this? The logic behind this is, for example, now it expects only one argument and other one, even if you don't pass, it takes the default value. Now if I say add of 3, now the interpreter will not understand whether this 3 was a non-default value for A, or was it expected that A should have a default value and this value should go into B. So it is a confusion for the interpreter, so it will not understand that. So that's why always the first parameter you can have, a first means in more than one, but towards the left you can have a mandatory parameter and towards the right only you can have the default value. So now when we pass only one value, it will understand, okay, this value is meant for A and B should be taken as default. And if we are passing two variables or two values, then it will understand that it is meant for both. So whenever you are using default value for the parameters, always make sure that the default value parameters should be towards the right. You should not have anything default on the left and a non-default towards the right. Now, till now we have seen examples of passing parameters of type string, passing parameters of type int. So let's see one example of passing parameter of type collection. There is no restriction of passing parameters of any type. You can have any type of parameters. So let's see an example wherein we want to send a collection type. So I'll create a method define show menu. Maybe let me keep this as a small letter as per the convention. And in this, I am expecting two parameters. One, a day, and next, a menu. So inside this, inside the method, I will first print with the formatting saying menu for day is. So this is my heading, and then I'm expecting a menu in a list format, so it's a collection. So for that, first I want to print it in a along with a number. So for that, I will take a variable index equal to 1, and then I'll start a for loop for item in menu. Now I will loop into this menu and I will print with a formatting saying item. Sorry, first I want to print index dot and then the item. So now this is my show menu method. Now I will have two types of menu, maybe for different days. So maybe for example, Monday menu, it is something like a list of pizza, sandwich, and maybe pasta. And I'll have another menu which can be named as Tuesday menu, which will be like for example, burger, biryani, Subway, salad, and maybe one more item, cake. So we have two menus, Monday menu and Tuesday menu. One is having 3 items, another one is having 5 items. So and then now I can call the show menu method multiple times. First I'll pass the day, so day will be in a string format saying Monday, and I'll pass the Monday menu, and I'll then pass again show menu with Tuesday, and I'll say Tuesday menu. So I'm calling this function with two different type of parameters. Now when I execute this, now you can see menu for Monday is, oh, there is a mistake in the logic because we have used the index but we have not incremented that inside the for loop. So every time in the for loop we have to increment the index. So index plus equal to 1, which is nothing but index equal to index plus 1. And let's clear this and execute again. So now you see menu for Monday is 1 2 3 pizza, sandwich, pasta. Menu for Tuesday is 1 2 3 4 5 burger, biryani, Subway, salad and cake. So this is how you use the same function for multiple purposes with multiple data types. We are passing parameters of string and list, and you can pass any type of parameters into this, so there is no restriction in this. So hope this video was useful. You are able to understand the function in Python and the various aspects of function. So there are still more to this. There are a lot of other things related to function which you should be aware when you are learning Python, which we'll be seeing in the further videos. If you liked our video, please do consider subscribing to it and hitting the bell icon so that you get notified for the further videos. Thank you.